Derek Chisora has had a great career from a financial perspective. Obviously, he hasn't earned as much money as the top guys because he's not as good as them. But for a fighter of his level, his degree of ability, he's done very, very well for himself. And this is because he's cultivated this cult following in the UK where fans love him because of the fact that he always comes to bring the heat every time he steps in the ring, or almost every time he steps in the ring. There was one or two fights where he didn't really show up, but for the most part, he does show up and he gives it 100%, win or lose. Fans like that. And also, something which is really underestimated and undervalued by hardcore boxing fans is the fact that Derek Chisora is an aggressive fighter. Generally speaking, the casual fan doesn't want to wait around for something to happen in a boxing match. They want excitement immediately. As soon as the first bell goes, they want to see action. They want to see smoke. And that's what Derek Chisora has always brought to the table. He's on you straight away. If Derek Chisora had been a guy who, had the same results as he has had, but was more of a boxer puncher, a guy who's going to feel his way into fights and stuff like that, I don't think he would have had the same type of cult following. It's because of the fact that he's aggressive, or at least partly. Obviously, there's Derek Chisora's personality. He's an oddball, he's an eccentric, and there's been a long tradition in Britain, of course, for many, many, certainly decades, maybe centuries, I don't know how far it goes back. There's been a tradition of the great British eccentric. And Derek Chisora, even though he's originally from Zimbabwe, he falls into that kind of category, of the great British eccentric, like Eubank Sr. did as well. He fell into that category. So that's part of the reason I think that people like Derek Chisora in Britain, because of this eccentricity. But as I say, the style he has of being aggressive and front foot heavy, not to be disrespectful, but let's say being a poor man's Joe Frazier, right? People like that. This is one of the reasons Mike Tyson was so popular, because people knew that when you tune in to watch Mike Tyson fight, you don't have to wait 5-6 rounds for something to happen. Something's going to happen immediately. Right? This guy's going to be on you like white on rice from the opening bell. Okay? So, Derek Chisora, fan favorite. The question is now, how long can he go on for? Is it going to reach a stage where the British Boxing Board of Control are going to take his license off him because of the fact he's taking too much punishment? I mean, they did that with Danny Williams, for example, but Williams never had the kind of cult following that Derek Chisora has. Williams had his fans, of course, but nothing like Derek Chisora. Of course, he lost to Derek Chisora for the British title many years ago. So, yeah, that's the question a lot of people are asking. How long can Derek Chisora really go on for? Is it at the stage now where there needs to be an intervention? Because, of course, his trilogy fight with Tyson Fury wasn't the least bit competitive and nobody expected it to be. He did take a decent amount of punishment. When I say decent, I mean took a lot of punishment in the fight. And that stuff catches up with you. Now, I say all that to talk about Derek Chisora calling out Francis Ngannou. Francis Ngannou has recently parted company with the UFC, and he has long expressed an interest, a desire to step into the squared circle and face people in a boxing ring like Tyson Fury. I know there was a back and forth between him and Dylan White a few years ago, etc. Well, Derek Chisora has thrown his hat into the ring for an Ngannou fight. He says he's willing to fight Ngannou in a boxing ring and in an octagon. Now, Tony Bellew, I know you guys don't want to hear what Tony Bellew has to say. I don't normally want to hear what Tony Bellew has to say, real talk. But Tony Bellew has advised Francis Ngannou against stepping in the boxing ring and facing off against real fighters. He's thinking about it from purely a pugilistic perspective. But Francis Ngannou isn't just thinking about that. I'm sure he, because of his punching power and his strength and all this kind of thing, and maybe he's sparred a lot of boxers over the years, he probably has a certain amount of confidence and thinks he can compete with some of the better fighters in the heavyweight division. But money plays a big part in why Francis Ngannou left the UFC and has always had this desire to go into boxing, at least in my estimation, because he's looking at the money these fighters are making in boxing and he's like, yo, I need to get paid like that. You've got guys in boxing who aren't world champions making more money than Francis Ngannou. And I know that's something that's always bothered him. So he's looking at it, I would imagine, from heavily from a monetary perspective, not just from a fighting perspective. And so I guess Tony Bellew maybe isn't factoring that in. But as far as Ngannou facing Derek Chisora, do I think he would have much of a chance in a boxing ring? I think because of Francis Ngannou's punching power, although we haven't seen him fight with 10-ounce gloves on. Yeah, he's been hitting guys with 4-ounce MMA gloves. And I'm going to kind of refer to something that Bob Arum said years ago with regards to MMA or specifically UFC fighters. He said that they have terrible chins. Now, that was the UFC of, I don't know when it was, 10 years ago when Bob Arum made those comments, maybe 7 years ago. He said they had terrible chins. Well, I don't think that all the MMA guys, all the UFC guys have got terrible chins. But what I will say is a good chin isn't as important in MMA as it is in boxing because of the fact that you've got so many other ways to fight, right? You can use grappling, you can kick, you have so many different tools at your disposal to get in there and defend yourself with and win a fight with. Whereas in boxing, you have to stand right there. So generally speaking, boxers are going to take more head punches. Basically, to cut to the chase, boxers are generally going to take more head punches than MMA guys. And therefore, it's more important in boxing to be able to take a shot. So in MMA, a fighter who maybe doesn't have, and look, there are plenty of boxers that don't take a great shot. But what I'm saying is, in MMA, it's easier to get away without having a decent chin and even reach a high level if you're a really skilled grappler or whatever, right? So there's more chance of you getting to a high level in MMA if you're a bit chinny. So those are the guys that Francis Ngannou has been fighting over the years. Let's see how his power translates when he's wearing 10-ounce gloves rather than 4-ounce gloves, right? These gloves are over twice the size of the gloves he's been wearing in UFC. Let's see how his power translates then. And let's see how he takes the shots from, proper professional fighters. I'm sure, I've got no doubt actually, that if Francis Ngannou caught Derek Chisora with his best shot, he could hurt him, he could knock him out. No doubt. I mean, I've long been saying on my channel that there are guys, anonymous guys, maybe they've never had a professional fight. I mean, Dylan White spoke about this recently because he was obviously out in the United States training with his new coach, Buddy McGirt. And he said that there are keep fitters. There are guys in places like Philly and these cities in America who maybe they had a few amateur bouts, but they've never had a pro bout. And they're absolute monsters in the gym. Guys who work day jobs. And Dylan White said some of these guys, I'm telling you, they could beat the world champions. Or at least in the gym, right? Because part of being successful in boxing is the ability to actually cope with the pressure of the event and all that kind of thing. There are certain people who are beasts in the gym, but they can't transfer that type of performance to the professional ring under the spotlight. But like I say, there are fighters who you've never heard of, who've never turned pro, who have crazy skills and are very talented. And not only is there crazy talented people, but there's people who can punch tremendously hard, who you'll never hear about, who will never fight pro. So given that fact, I've got no doubt that Francis Ngannou may be the equivalent of that. Yeah, he's never had a professional boxing match to my knowledge, but that doesn't mean he can't hit as hard as the top guys in boxing. I'm not saying he can necessarily, but I'm open to the possibility that he can. As hard or harder than most of the top guys in the heavyweight division. So yeah, I'm sure if he caught Derek Chisora with his best shot, Chisora would be in serious trouble. Maybe he'd be out cold. But boxing is so much more than that. Boxing is about technique. It's about stamina. How would Francis Ngannou cope with a pressure fighter coming at him who can avoid his shots? Derek Chisora comes underneath the shots and all that kind of thing. So, I mean, if they did make Francis Ngannou versus Derek Chisora, Francis Ngannou would probably get paid very well for it. And, he might not want to risk it against Derek Chisora. He might want to only fight a boxer who is top tier. Because imagine he goes in there with Chisora and loses. He's not going to get the kind of paydays that he dreamed about. So maybe he'll pass up on someone like a Chisora. We'll see. Because, obviously he's been courted by Tyson Fury and what have you. But if it were to happen, I don't have an issue with it. And in this whole story, Dylan White has also chimed in, but not to call out Francis Ngannou this time, at least not to my knowledge, but to call out Derek Chisora. He said that he would face Derek Chisora in MMA, in an octagon. Obviously, Dylan White has an MMA background, or at least a martial arts background. He was originally a kickboxer. That's what he did before he got into boxing. And he did have one MMA fight, I think it was a professional fight, I want to say. You can watch it on YouTube. I'm sure it's still floating around. So he has that kind of background. And I believe Dean also has like a jiu-jitsu or some kind of martial arts background. And I guess they've grappled over the years and what have you. So Dylan has some kind of grounding in that kind of thing. You would imagine, therefore, that would give him an advantage over Derek Chisora. But has Derek Chisora been secretly honing his MMA skills? Maybe he has. Some boxers do this. They don't broadcast it to the world, but behind the scenes, they are, maybe they're friends with certain MMA guys and they're honing their skills and stuff like that. I remember David Haye, when he was fighting, he would sometimes train at London Shoot Fighters. And I know he was friends with several of the British UFC guys. And, he would grapple with them and stuff like that. So, yeah, some boxers do this. Is this the case with Derek Chisora? I don't know. Even if he has no MMA experience at all, I wouldn't be surprised to see him in an octagon. Because Derek Chisora is just that wacky. So anyway, let me know what you guys think about all this in the comments below. The possibility of seeing Derek Chisora fight Francis Ngannou. I wouldn't think there's a very high likelihood of it happening. But if it did, how would you guys feel about it? And also Dylan White versus Derek Chisora in MMA. That's another novelty fight, right? I think that it might actually generate more interest than a third boxing match between the two, just because of the novelty of it, because we know what a Derek Chisora-Dylan White fight looks like. We've already seen two of them. So for the trilogy fight, for it to happen in MMA with little gloves, grappling and kicking, it's two boxers at the end of the day. People might find that more intriguing, just the novelty of it. So again, let me know what you think about that. And also, just to finish off, I'm not sure if Dylan White has called out Ngannou again, but would you guys be interested in that fight? Dylan White against Francis Ngannou in an octagon? Because Dylan White has said that he's up for that in the past, that he's not just someone that wants to get Ngannou in a boxing ring. He'd be willing to cross over and fight him in MMA. So yeah, let me know what you guys think about everything I've discussed in this video.